Test, 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 test. Test 1, 2, 3, 4. Can we get all the way to test 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. Test was successful, and therefore I am ready to begin the stream. Where am I? Yes, I am. Right. Well, let's make that a bit bigger. How do I make... There we go. Right, everybody, everyone. This is going to be a bug-free stream today. That means we're not going to encounter any bugs. We're not going to create any bugs. This is just going to be features. The first thing I'm going to do is what I intended to do last week, which is give users the ability to restrict metadata. Let me show you. So we've got an issue where we have quite a large list of output types that allow you to send metadata in various forms. So sometimes this is headers, sometimes the metadata is sent as metadata, and it's often useful to have metadata on a message that you're going to use for things like determining, say, the topic that messages are going to get sent to when you're outputting to Kafka. But you also don't want to actually send the metadata because you're not going to use it downstream. So this is quite a, I would say quite an obvious feature when you're allowing people to reference metadata in an output, and you're also sending it to an output. Then it seems reasonable to distinguish which particular metadata fields are going to get sent. But I just never got around to it. I figured I'd wait to see what people are going to use it for, and now we got to the point where somebody did ask for the ability, and it was something that's going to go in anyway, so I'm just going to do it now. We've had some opinions. I basically outlined 3 different solutions. The first one was a lame duck solution that I put in there just to deceive people, and it's an exceptionally bad idea, just to make the other solutions look less bad. I think what I'm going to do to begin with is add a field to outputs that allows you to explicitly state which metadata fields you don't want to send to the output. That's a little bit... What do I want to do? Regular expression patterns. I think I'm just going to do static prefixes, because basically I'm able to add lots of different ways of restricting metadata. I would ideally like to find one that satisfies almost everybody and is also nice and simple. Regular expressions is obviously more powerful, but I think for the most part people are going to be satisfied with just being able to specify path prefixes, key prefixes, which will be just static strings. So let me illustrate what I mean by that with a config example. I say YAML. So imagine we've got something where we've got an output that is maybe Kafka, and we have a topic, and the topic is going to be determined from a metadata field, which is foo. And so obviously our messages are going to need to have a metadata field foo. I'm just going to simulate that here with a Bloblang mapping. So let's say that the metadata is, let's say we've got a bunch of metadata fields, and they are foo. I'm going to be very uncreative with this stuff. So we're going to have foo, bar, and baz as our metadata fields. Actually, I should probably check that this config does what we want. Will this work? It extremely should. Right. Did not find expected key. Where? Line 1. Oh, that's interesting. I might have... so I've been messing around with the config spec and how we do linting, so there's all kinds of nasty bugs I might have introduced. It's probably because it's YAML. It's probably an indentation issue, isn't it? That was a terrible error message. Line 1 did not find expected key. Well, whatever. Okay, so if I put it in an object, so we get a little log message here, which is going to give us, so we're going to list all the metadata fields just to check that my mapping here is successful. Okay, right, so we're going to send messages through, and they're going to have a metadata field foo, bar, and baz, and let's just assume that, oh, this is where my indentation's bad. So let's just assume that we want to use one of these for the topic, and we want to send the other two. So we want to send to Kafka the metadata fields bar and baz, and also anything else. But we don't want to include foo. So what I'm proposing right now is that all of these outputs get a new field metadata. Where you'll be able to do something like this. So this would be, this is an array of strings where we can have one or more prefixes for metadata keys that we don't want to send to the particular output. Which would get this job done. Nice simple one. And I don't think many people are going to have this particular use case, because I think if you're excluding metadata fields, you're probably doing it because you don't want to waste space in your topic partitions, so you're reducing the amount of data that gets transferred. So what's more likely is that you would actually want to have an explicit list of metadata fields to include. But I do want to avoid, for most people, having to make an explicit list. So for example, we could have something like include prefixes, and you would put in bar and baz. So I don't think that's a great user experience, because it means you're going to have to explicitly list everything that's going to come through that you want to include. So even if that list is static and it's small, you're still having to have this exhaustive, ugly list. I think it's generally cleaner to just have an exclude. So how would you solve the case where, you know, if we were going to add in a buzz, for example, we don't want to include excess fields. So we have an explicit idea of what metadata fields are going to go into our output destination, and everything else ain't. How do you go about doing that with exclude prefixes? Because that's going to make me do the opposite. I'm going to have to make an explicit list of everything that's coming through, which again is bad for the same reason. However, there is a nice workaround for this. So what I'm going to suggest to people is they do a little something like this, where, so meta as your assignment target in Bloblang will just set the entire metadata of a message. So any other fields that already existed will get cleared. It's only what you give, and what it expects is an object of key value strings. And when you call meta as a function with empty arguments, then it gives back an object of key value pairs of the existing things. So meta equals meta will just do nothing, basically, because you're just copying the metadata. But what you can do now, since last week, is you can do a mapping that only affects the keys of your hold on, bear with me here. This is so I can, this last line here is so I can run some messages through this and see what actually comes out. I just want to make sure that my mapping is correct here, because this is what I'm going to recommend to people, so I want to make sure that it looks right. So what you can do is you can call map each key on meta, and what that does is it allows you to specify a mapping that will be executed for every key of this object, and what you return will become the new key. So you could just return the mapping this referring to the individual key, in which case nothing gets changed. Or you could do something like this dot uppercase. So you'll uppercase each key. Let's just run that now. So yeah, you can see on the output here, all the keys are now uppercased. So what I'm thinking is, as a general recommendation for people who want to determine which metadata fields get sent to their output and which ones don't, is you perform a mapping of for your metadata keys somewhere in your pipeline before messages reach the output destination that renames the keys and the metadata keys that you don't want to send, that you want to preserve in the message to refer to it at the output level, but you don't actually want to send to the output. You use a mapping to give them an explicit prefix when they're not metadata keys that you want to send. So in my example above, where I want bar and baz, but I don't want foo and I don't want buzz, and anything new that comes in, I also don't want to just suddenly start. If there's new metadata keys that arise over time, I don't want the assumption to be that they're going to get sent to my output destination. So what we would do, if I was going to follow my recommendation here, is I would say have an array. Seems like a sensible way to list the things that we want. Okay. Does this look cryptic? If anybody's in the chat, let me know, because I'm going to be asking for feedback throughout the stream in order to prevent bugs. So you are my compass. So yeah, this would be one pattern, and obviously you can do things like have other things like this dot contains. Maybe there's some pattern or something. So basically all of these patterns are going to be an explicit case where, yes, these are keys that we want to leave as they are. And then this final one is like a catch-all, where if we haven't matched any of these other patterns, then this thing happens. Is that actually the default syntax? I don't even know Bloblang. How do I not know that? I'm just going to have a quick look. Sorry, let me show you my screen. I'm looking at the pattern matching. Oh, okay, so catch-all is underscore. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so our catch-all is just going to be an underscore. and yeah, this should work. So this is my current example. So basically I want to make an explicit list, which is going to be here. I could actually bring this out. So let allowed meta equals bar baz, and then we'll find it here. Contains this. Does that work? Cool, it does. So as you can see on the output here, we've got the keys what I was expecting, and the ones that I haven't explicitly listed here now have an underscore prefix, and the ones that I did list are unchanged. And now what this allows me to do is at the output level, so imagine if this were a world where that was uncommented, I could change the reference to foo, because now I know that it's going to have an underscore because it's not something that's going to get sent to my output. And then all I have to do in my exclude prefixes array is include my general underscore catch-all prefix. So everything that I've just gone through, you could do the exact opposite and support include prefixes. The reason why I don't like that is because you would either have to have an individual list item for every single possible key that you want to send, or your keys that you're sending would all have to have a common prefix, which I think it's more likely to trip somebody up than being able to just say, okay, all my like private keys that I'm not going to send forward, I'm just going to give them a common prefix, because it doesn't matter what the key looks like because it's not going anywhere else. It's just being referenced in my config. I think this just seems to fit better whenever I've done my little thought exercises. And now that I've actually got my example here, I could make this a lot simpler by changing this to an if. If allowed meta dot contains this, so our if should actually be a negative, because we're only modifying the result when the item is not in the list. So I can just do that. So metadata equals meta map each key, and within that, if it's not in our list of allowed metadata, then we give it this underscore prefix. Let's just do a check to make sure that that works. And if that works, then I'm happy. You seem happy. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to implement this. So what I've done as well is in the example here, which I think is what I'm going to do now, is I've got a metadata key where the exclude and maybe in the future include fields will be within, and that's just going to make it a little bit nicer to document. It's going to make it a bit nicer to quickly slot that into various configs, which you'll probably see in a minute. So yeah, let's get started. So where am I going to put this? I'm going to put this in the output section, because this is going to be shared, but it's only going to be shared by outputs, and all outputs are aware of the output package, if that makes any sense. Do you already have a metadata file in here? No. Okay, that's what I'm going to do then. Metadata.go in package output. So I mean, this isn't necessarily a behavior that's going to be specific to outputs, but I don't see myself wanting this anywhere else. Maybe for some processes. that interact with external services. Nah, because you can use a branch processor for that anyway. Yeah, I'm going to put this in the output package, and what I want is there's going to be a struct. That's going to be the config structure, exclude prefixes, just an array of strings. Metadata describes actions to be performed on message metadata before being sent to an output destination. Does that seem reasonable? Yeah. Actions to be performed on message metadata. It's not really actions to be performed. Maybe that's not the right word. I'll think about it. New metadata. So I always do these for every like config struct. I always accompany them with a new function. Returns a metadata configuration struct, because I like to have explicit default values, because obviously you can't always rely on the 0 value, and sometimes it's nice to just give a sensible default rather than nils everywhere. And yeah, I think that's probably going to be all that I do for now. So this is just going to make it easy for me in the future, because this config struct is going to be embedded in the config struct of several outputs. By having it within like a namespace, so it's going to be metadata dot exclude prefixes rather than metadata underscore exclude underscore prefixes. It's just going to make it easier for me to add more ways of excluding and including metadata keys over time. So there's obviously a case for just embedding exclude underscore prefixes within the root. So it would look like maybe something like that. But I think in this case, it's nice and clean to just have an actual metadata section, and yeah, it's just going to make my life a bit easier. So the other thing so we've got a config struct. This is what's actually going to be embedded within the config object, which gets parsed. But all config fields also are accompanied by a formal specification for what the fields are, with a bit of a description and maybe default values and stuff like that. Metadata fields returns a docs spec for the fields within a metadata config struct. Okay, I hope that's clear. And we just have one. Is it going to be an advanced field or is it a common field? I'm actually going to say, I'm going to say advanced for now. Actually, you know what? The field itself is going to be common, but the metadata namespace, which is the parent, you can still decide that that's an advanced feature. So for example, in Kafka land, you might say, customizing the metadata is a common thing, and therefore make the parent common, and therefore all the children, which are already common, will appear in the common config example. But if it's some other output where it's unlikely somebody's going to care, then you could choose to make it advanced. Provide a list of explicit key prefixes, explicit metadata key prefixes to be excluded when adding metadata to sent messages. Does that make sense? Provide a list of explicit metadata key prefixes to be excluded. To be excluded. Whatever, that's fine. A list of explicit metadata key prefixes to be excluded when adding metadata to sent messages. I can come back and change that if it doesn't look right. Now, what are outputs going to do with this config struct? So if we use Kafka as an example, this isn't the stupid writer thing. We get a Kafka config. The excludes are going to be part of that, and then at some point, so build system headers. This is where we actually enrich the message with metadata from our message. And what we do is we just iterate them. So what I want to do, I don't want to add implementation details to the specific output. So this all of this exclude stuff is going to be embodied within this file. So what I want is I just want to replace this. So maybe it'll be something like, well, firstly, this is going to have to be this is going to have to be aware of our config. Let's see where this gets called. We pull out the version from where? Huh. That's interesting. We've got our version wrapped within a mutex, even though it only gets set once at construction time. I'll tell you what. At the risk of introducing, I know I said this was a bug-free stream, but I'm extremely confident that that change there isn't going to introduce a bug, basically. So don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. This is a worry-free stream, as well as a bug-free stream. So I think we're fine here. Right, so we don't actually need to... I'll tell you what. Is it really that big a deal to make this a method? And just do that. I think that's probably fine. People in the chat, if you feel this might be a bug that I'm introducing here, then please let me know. Otherwise, you're partly to blame. And now I get to do that. That's a neat little bit of refactoring, isn't it? Wow, it's a lot more readable. Blimey. Okay, so that was a complete digression. So what we're probably going to want to do here is something like meta filter. There's going to be something that's owned by the output, is constructed from the config, and we're going to use that to iterate our metadata. Just do that. And it's going to handle the filtering and stuff for us, so we don't have to implement. I mean, it's quite simple now because it's just checking against prefixes, but in the future maybe we want to be able to support regular expressions and things. I could also attach this method here directly to the config struct, which means there wouldn't be any initialization or anything for the output to do. It would just reference the config directory directly. However, because there might be a future where we are pulling out and parsing regular expressions, then there ought to be something. I don't want to have to refactor this later, so if I want to add regular expressions in the future, I already want there to be a clear place to put that. So I am going to add a method to metadata, which is going to be, I could be a little bit cheeky here, but basically there's going to be something that we're going to call, it might return an error actually as well, because this could be, if we've got regular expressions in the config, then they might be invalid. I'm going to put this at the top because it's annoying me. And yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to return something, metadata filter maybe, let's call it. And that's going to be a pointer type. We don't want to return an interface, and we don't want to return a copied struct. I'm just going to call this filter. Attempts to construct a metadata filter. This isn't just going to be regarding keys, by the way. There might be in the future some field here whereby a user might want to exclude metadata based on the value. So think about that for a minute. Filter attempts to construct a metadata filter. Yeah, leave it there. And this is going to be pretty easy. Again, there has to be a new type here, which is a bit annoying, but does there? See, I think what I typically see in Go World is if there's going to be any sort of parsing. So imagine we had like an exclude regular expressions field, and something needs to trigger parsing those out into regular expression structs. So maybe what is it? I think that's it, isn't it? It's just regex. Maybe there would be an actual, it's a pointer, isn't it? There'll be a field that obviously isn't part of the config parse, but is part of the metadata struct. And what you might do is you might call a method on this struct that's just, parse. It would have to be pointer. Or, maybe you would call this validate or something. And then what would happen is, as part of this call, we would compile all the regular expressions and we would populate the field that we've got here. So we would append the compiled versions to this or return an error and stuff. I think that's obviously fine, but what I don't like is it's just the implicit state of having made that call. Like I just feel like if you're then later on relying on some method, in your code, which is this this iter function, the fact that it's kind of implicit that you've called parse before that, and maybe iter would need to return an error. I just don't really, I'm not a massive fan of that. I would rather have an explicit new struct that you create from the config, and that way you are absolutely 100% sure that you have the thing that is going to do the thing. So let's just implement it that way, because that's what I want to do. That's how I want to do it. Metadata filter provides a way to filter metadata keys based on a metadata config. And this is going to outrage some people. Oh, that's going to make some people mad. Basically, we're just going to copy the slice. That is going to make some people livid. And here we go. This is this is it. This is the function. And then what we'll need, actually let's put that above. What we'll need is a method on our filter. Metadata filter, iterate, and then I believe the function signature is that. And oh, sorry. Sorry, excuse that. It really annoys me that you can't do that. It applies a function to each metadata key value pair that passes the filter. And then we actually do this thing. Could we potentially return an error? Need to return an error from here? I mean, I'm not a fan of this function signature. The original, I can't really remember the rationality for this, but essentially in your walk function, you can return an error which will end the iteration, so you can use it for that. I guess I kind of figured that you might be doing some sort of I/O within the iteration, but that doesn't tend to really be the case. It's always you use the iteration to aggregate all the metadata that you're sending, and then you send it in one request. So I'm not a huge fan of that signature, but whatever. We'll keep it for now. And then so if okay, right, so for every single prefix oh, Mihai's in the chat. Okay, we've got the bug spotter. Kind of confusing to have two string params since their order can get mixed up easily. Yes, that's true. Yeah, no, you're right. I'll call this key value. I mean, I don't think that I mean, I was worried about shadowing, but I don't think I don't know how that would work anyway. Whatever. I think this is fine. Right, so for every single prefix within our excludes, we're going to call strings has prefix on the metadata key, And if that is true, we'll return nil. And if it's not true, then we return whatever that user provided. Right, and that's it for now, I think. In the future we might have... So in the future we could have exclude patterns, which would be a little bit more complicated. And then maybe going further from that, we would have maybe going further from that, we would have an explicit include prefixes. If somebody really wants it, they really want it badly, and there's tears and there's shouting, then I would probably just add it. In which case, is that going to make this function insanely complicated? I would probably branch, because it would obviously be a requirement when constructing our filter that you don't have both include and exclude slices, because if you're including, then it's an explicit list of things you're allowing, and exclude is the opposite, so you couldn't really have both. So, there's something I missed in the docs. This is an array. I think that's it. Yep, I think that's it. Oh no, and I just realized that I can't have this in the output package, or at least not conveniently, because we have this writer package, and the implementation is within writer, but output refers to writer. So we can't have writer refer to metadata, a type defined within the output package. That's really annoying. So for a bit of context, I had an output package which just contained all the output implementations. I had the same thing for the input package, and I had them all implement the channel-based API. So they all had to have an individual implementation of all the metrics and logging and reconnects stuff, and it was an absolute nightmare to maintain. So that's when I started migrating to most inputs and outputs implementing the simpler interface. And while I was doing that refactor, I was finding it kind of difficult to keep track of how far through I'd gotten. So I made the arbitrary decision to start putting them in a new package, thinking that would be nice and clean. So you'd have this writer implementation for AMQP or whatever in this separate package, and then the output would just be the config and the constructor and stuff. And I regret that now, because I think it makes it awkward to read and write inputs and outputs, because you're constantly bouncing around different files that do different things. And obviously I'm not going to be going in that direction in the future. It's just going to be one place, or rather it's going to be one place for a service where you have your input and your output and all the other component types. I think what I'm going to do then, since I can't just have this in the output thing, since I've got to have it separate, I'll put it in the internal directory anyway, which will be nice because it means I can change the interface if I need to, and everything's going to end up in internal eventually anyway. Do I want to just make an output directory, knowing that eventually we'll end up with an input processor, one for all of the component types? I don't like that. But then I've also been told off in the past for having empty directories. well, whatever. The beautiful thing about it being inside the internal directory is that it's internal, and that means I can do breaking changes to any of these APIs. So let's do that for now. Yeah, I think this is probably the way to go. So eventually, when we get Benthos v4 or whatever, what's currently the output package is going to be very different, because I'm going to move plugin users into a separate, like, air-gapped package, so they're never going to be impacted from breaking changes, and therefore all of the public APIs and all of these packages, they're going to be moved into internal, so that I can do breaking changes to them. And so eventually this package here, component, is going to be populated with a package for every single component type, which is going to contain just helpful functions, because the implementation of them is going to be in service. So this is what I'm currently doing now, is I'm implementing a few new things, and yeah, so you'll have like a service package, so say for like Kafka or whatever, and that's going to contain all the component types for that particular service, which means these are just going to be helper functions. So let's actually go and do that. So I'm going to add my new metadata config struct, and it probably makes sense actually to put that underneath static headers. So you might define some static headers, and then underneath that you'll specify how you would like to manipulate metadata. So one thing I could do as well is, so I was originally thinking that you'd have like metadata, and it would just be this common field which has merit. So if Kafka has a metadata field containing all the filtering stuff, and also every other output that supports the same feature has the same named field, then it's kind of nice. It's kind of the same as like having max in flight be a consistent field, and the batching stuff as well. It's always the same field name. But then the flip side is, obviously in Kafka land we call metadata headers, so maybe this field should be headers, or maybe it should be something like metadata headers, in which case we would end up with a different name for every single one. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with metadata now, and I'll let that sink in. Yeah, I'll let that sink in for a bit, and then if it angers me later on, then I'll consider changing it. Oh, and the order of this is all messed up. Maybe I should call this metadata config or metadata filter config or something. No, let's just leave that. Okay, and what I'm going to need is to pull out a meta filter, output, metadata filter. This is a pointer type. So the flow is that field is now included in the config, and it will get parsed along with all the other stuff, and then during construction I will end up creating my meta filter conf metadata filter, and obviously if that fails, then we'll want to inform the user failed to construct metadata filter. So since I don't actually have an error example for this, then I don't really have a basis for knowing whether that's going to be confusing, but I would imagine an error in the future if we allow things like regular expressions, then it would be fail to construct metadata filter, regular expression, filter parse, blah. Or if you have both include and exclude patterns, it would be something like fail to construct metadata filter must not specify includes and excludes your dum-dum. So that's probably fine. But yeah, we'll construct our meta filter here. And I've already done the bit where we use the meta filter. Where is that? Build user defined headers. Build system headers. Meta filter. Yeah. So that's pretty much it, I think. Do I think? The other thing is the documentation spec, and I probably also make a mention of metadata here somewhere anyway. Right, so let's add a field. I'm going to make this a common field because static headers is also common. Specify criteria for which metadata values are added to messages, are sent with messages as headers. Don't need an example for that, and it's not a map, it's got children, and those children are metadata fields. So these field specs look they're a little bit of an eyesore. I like the fact that you define it all in source code and it gets compiled and it can get unit tested and all that stuff. And I like the fact that all the documentation is embedded in the binary because you can do cool stuff with it, but I would like to find a neater way of actually writing the documentations within source, because it's not great to look at. But anyway, so metadata field is common. Specify criteria for which metadata values are sent with messages as headers. And that is accompanied by this one, an optional map of static headers that should be added to messages in addition to metadata. And is that the only mention of metadata in the Kafka output documentation? Yes, it is. I'm going to add a note at the top here in the main docs. Metadata, and let's even link to the metadata section. Docs. What is it? Docs configuration / metadata. Message metadata. Added to each. Okay, let's not repeat message. Metadata will be added to each message sent as headers, but can be restricted using the field metadata. And that is a link. Okay, let's try that. Firstly, can we generate the documentation? We've updated the example config and the website docs. That's a good sign. Just do a quick diff. That looks fine. That looks fine. And we've got a new field thing. Ignore the dodgy white space. I'm just going to run the site from another console. And then I'm going to have a look at it. Would you like to see as well? Here you go. Right, so we've got the website. What is the metadata? So this is the docs for metadata. I'm going to add an entry here. So I'm going to describe this new behavior in this doc. So there's one central place for it. And also show that map each key method we've got. And then the more important bit is, does the documentation look good for a thing? So we've now got this field included in the common config example. Still not sure I like mixing headers and metadata, but whatever. So that link works. That link works. Cool. That's it. Metadata will be added to each message sent as headers, but can be restricted using the field metadata. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. I like that. So before I bother copy pasting that solution to all the outputs, let's make a quick unit test, because it would be rather embarrassing to copy that into several outputs and then realize that the API is fundamentally flawed for some reason. Test metadata filter. I'm going to keep this really simple because I feel like there's a lot of stuff I do on the streams that must be very boring as a spectator. It's not really a spectator sport, especially the documentation. But tests are definitely, I would imagine, a boring thing to watch me do. Right, so doing a bit table-driven testing here. Input meta, output meta, conf, name, no filter. What does it look like when we have not a filter? Foo 1 bar baz, and when we don't have a filter, it would be quite nice to get all the same stuff out. Right, so for each test in our tests, I always do this just in case one day we refactor and we run all of these tests in parallel. But obviously, we don't really need it right now. Right, so so we're going to have a metadata. Yep, we construct the input metadata object, and then we get our filter from the config, and then we require that there was not an error. Obviously, maybe one day I would expand the test struct to include an error if we want to check that we do get one. And then what we're going to do is we're going to filter, so we get output meta is going to be a map string of string, and we're going to call our filter on the input metadata with a function, and we'll also require that this doesn't return an error, but again, maybe one day we'll expand that. And all the things that we've seen we keep note of, and then we assert that what we've seen is what we expect. And it will be. It will be. Look at that. Amazing. Right, so let's add in one, let's say foo filter for this test. This is a test where we're going to have a foo filter. Right. Should I... I'm just going to... Going to do a bit of struct initialization here. Okay, so as a prefix, I'm just going to have the letter F. It's quite interesting, but wish I'd know a bit in advance when you're planning to stream, which I... Yeah, so I mean, yeah, right now I'm kind of doing things a bit, I'm kind of slapping these together whenever I feel like it, but my goal is to firstly give a proper heads up, because obviously me announcing I'm going to do a stream a minute before I start it, it means almost everybody is inevitably going to miss it. And I mean, I'm keeping it to about every week, so I think I probably should be able to keep to a schedule, and then once I've got a schedule I can actually, because I already know what I'm going to be working on when I do a stream, and I normally know that days in advance anyway, because there's a list of stuff I want to work on. So I'll you know, what I intend to do is get a lot of the really outrageously boring stuff out of the way first, then already have the stream scheduled, and then when I start it, then people who want to watch live can watch it live, because I not only give them a heads up, but hopefully I can do it in times that are good for most time zones, and yeah, I can do a proper job of streaming. But yeah, for now, because I'm kind of still just sort of experimenting with what I'm comfortable with and how long I'm willing to stream for and stuff like that. I'm just kind of, basically this isn't how I intend to do things forever. Right, I think I'm just going to leave it at these two tests for now. I'll probably flesh this out in more tests eventually. I'm not going to. Let's be honest. I'm not going to. I'm going to flesh this out when I add a new field or if a bug gets found. But I mean, look at this. We're 87.5% covered. There's one function. It does one thing. I think we're good. I think we're good for tests. Now, the other thing I could do is an integration test, which would be interesting. So we've got a test already, which I think we run with Kafka, where we check that we can send metadata. So if I wanted to create a generic integration test that just made sure that, I mean, it's worth doing, not to test the behavior of the filter itself, but just to test that the output is constructing the filter correctly. And that's why I've got things like the batching tests, because I know that the batching mechanism is general across all the outputs that use it. What I want to test is the fact that when you change the config, it actually gets represented when the output runs, because there's a couple different ways that you could mess that up when writing an output, and it not be obvious until you run the config. So I could add an integration test for just checking the filters, and what I would need to do is add something like this where, you know, maybe we've got some common, it would be a common metadata exclude prefixes output meta exclude prefix, something weird like that, and then all the outputs where we want to test whether or not they respect this value. Actually, you know what, I'm probably just write this in like 2 minutes. Test metadata filter, integration test metadata filter, and I think that's it for the test definition within here. All that would be left is copy this test with a little bit of copy paste magic. Test metadata filter, and I'm just going to put filtered. Can send and receive metadata filtered. And then what I would do is there's going to be some variable that I can change. I'm going to copy from the batching. I'm going to copy from the batching thing. Where do I do this stuff? Can send batches. Here we go. So we've got config vars, which is just a standard set of config variables for exactly this purpose. So I would set that at the beginning. So there's going to be output meta prefix equals F. And then what I would expect is we send a message with foo and foo value and bar value, and we only get back bar value. I'm just going to make sure. So we've got this general helper function. I bet it's really annoying you that this is red, isn't it? I bet for the viewers that is excruciating to see that this won't compile. And I'm just bouncing around as if it's fine. I just want to make sure that we check that we've got an explicit. So what do? We receive a message and we extract all the metadata. And then what we do is we walk all the metadata keys and we just make sure the metadata. Oh, okay. So, that's a bit of a pain, isn't it? Because what I want to do is I want to check the absence of a metadata field. So this is fine. We receive a message. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to receive the message and pull that out. And I'm still going to check that the message matches what we want, which is we've got our bar key and we've got hello world as the contents. But I'm also going to assert that what's the interface here? We want metadata, and then we want to get foo, and we want to assert that it's. Is there an empty? Does that work for string? Looks like it does. We want to assert that this doth not give us our foo value. And now I will go to my config vars, and I've already forgotten what the variable is called. Output meta exclude prefix. Thank you, autocomplete. Used by metadata filter tests to check. Why do I even have these comments? Used by metadata filter tests to check that filters work. There you go. Let's check that filters work. So in the event where in the future we add things like prefixes and patterns and includes and all that stuff, I don't care about the individual behavior, because all I want to check is that the output is correctly respecting the config. I don't care that the filter itself exhibits the correct behavior, because we test that elsewhere. The integration bit is just making sure that the config is respected. And now I need to make sure that that thing gets used. So we've got our new field. I need to make sure that the string matches. What's the string I used? Output meta exclude prefix. And we don't need to convert that to a string because it's already a string. Cool. Shall we test it? Now, if I think I added that one to the Red Panda suite, so let's run it. Test integration. Kafka, Red Panda. Is it going to work? By the way, thank you for this. I think it works a lot nicer. Oh, why did I make it verbose? I don't like that. I don't like that. We passed. Okay, cool. Easy. So now when I add this field to more outputs, it'll be a case of copy pasting the config stuff and then copy pasting this and this line, and then we've got our test. Now, how many outputs are there that I've got to do this for? There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 outputs that I am doing this for. Am I going to make you watch me do it? Yeah. No, I'm not going to make you watch me do it. I'm going to do it, and then it's up to you if you stick around. Okay? I mean, I don't like the idea of just leaving this unfinished, because I'm never going to finish it. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to update the integration test for every single output that I intend to do this for. And then, okay, I'm not doing it for the AWS stuff. MQP09, but I'm not making you watch this. Okay? If there are viewers and there's no thumbs down on the video, then I'm going to assume that everybody loved this. Everybody loved watching me do chores. Unfortunately, I have to bail out. Need to show Benthos to a bunch of people at a meetup about bioinformatics. I cannot believe this. That is a terrible excuse. And no, I don't accept that. I don't accept that. That means it's just going to be on me on my own now. How do you feel about that? Because the delay, you're probably already gone. If you watch the video after having left, I hope you feel really bad. Okay? In fact, I'm just going to sit in silence now. I'm just going to refactor in silence. And if there are no thumbs down, then I'm just going to assume that people love that. They're lapping it up. Panda. But you get brownie points for doing a presentation, definitely. In fact, you might get more stickers for that. So what am I doing here? I'm going to copy paste. Oh, hang on. Ooh. I just had an interesting thought. We've got path prefix is a slice. And we've got a test where we're interpolating that slice in here. Oh, haha, because it's YAML. If that's an empty string, yeah. I think if we have an explicit string, in fact, I'm going to write a unit test for that because I almost didn't even think of that particular gotcha. Let's put in empty filter. And I'm not going to read the docs for strings has prefix. I'm just going to run the test and see for myself. So if we have an empty string as a prefix, we drop all metadata. And I think I am happy about that. I think that's, yeah. How else would you interpret that? Yeah, I think that's fine. The reason why we don't just drop, because obviously when this isn't set for the first metadata test, we're testing that we can send metadata and we receive it. So if this was an explicit string, then yeah, we would drop all the metadata in that. I would imagine that that test fails. But because we're just interpolating it, we're doing a string replace before we even do the config bars, then this is just empty. So we end up with an empty array, which is accidentally what I wanted. Okay, right, let's move on. Let's move on. Move on, mate. Right, that's a failed test. Test that is going to go red. And we want to do the same for Redis. What is it? Redis hash and Redis streams. So Redis streams, yep. We want to add it there. We also want to add it to hash. And run the test for both of those. Oh! Huh, I don't actually have, I don't have a, wait, what? I've got Redis hash as listed as sending metadata, but it doesn't look like it actually does, because you make a, you build the data yourself. So how does that work? Why did I list that? Let's have a look at the implementation quickly. Redis hash. Oh, it's because I've got a walk metadata thing, right. So if you specify walk metadata true, I'm going to refactor this. There's the PR currently open for MongoDB stuff, and a really interesting reminder from that was that a lot of the outputs work with these really awkward ways of specifying fields that you want to pick out of messages, so like JSON paths and metadata keys and things like that, in order to produce a structured document which then gets sent to the output destination. And because we've got Bloblang now, we could just replace all of those mechanisms with just a Bloblang mapping, which would end up satisfying all the use cases. So yeah, I've got a note to, I'm going to have to visit every single output and add that in, which isn't going to be fun, but it's got to get done. It's got to get done, isn't it? But I can also remove it from this test because I don't think it really makes sense to be added to Redis hash. So I'm not and then SQS, which is in the AWS suite. We just want to test. Here we go. So copy that thing, and then copy the test. Oh, okay. Why am I not already testing? Oh, I don't have a metadata test, and that is probably because it's because Amazon does nasty stuff with the headers. Yeah. Okay, so for a bit of context why I'm so upset. User-defined headers, when you send them as part of a S3 object or SQS message or whatever, it gets attached as headers with a custom prefix to distinguish them from Amazon's own headers, which is a good thing. However, the reason why I'm a little bit agitated is because the API, when you send user-defined headers, you don't have to add that prefix in yourself. It gets automatically pre-pended on the server side, I'm guessing. I imagine that's not part of the... Maybe it is part of the API itself. But annoyingly, when you query, when you get back data using the AWS Go API, and I'm assuming this is the same with all the other APIs, you get back that custom prefix. And obviously, I didn't muck around checking that when I implemented metadata for AWS components in Benthos. And so we have that annoying thing where Benthos does the same annoying thing that the Go APIs do, which is you specify headers without the prefix gets added, and then when you consume stuff with the prefix doesn't get automatically removed. So the headers, the keys that you sent are now different to what you get back. They also, annoyingly, they go even further than that, and they make it, they capitalize all the letters, they make it title case, which I don't understand. I don't get it. But yeah, so long story short, I'm not going to add that to my unit test. But I'm sure it'll be fine. Right, GCP PubSub, that's the next one. GCP PubSub. It's a very modest config. Cool. And right, the last one is just the HTTP client. HTTP client. I'm just going to have a quick look at this. I will definitely already have integration tests, but these will be written as unit tests. So I shan't bore you with that. I'm going to bore you with something else instead. So we've got our unit tests. I'm just going to add that all now. And that's going to fail when I run it. And let's go through those same outputs now and actually implement them. I'll tell you what, I'm going to add the documentation first, and then that's also going to fail when I try and run the docs, because I'll have documented fields that don't exist. So when I generate the docs, I'm going to get a failure. And it's going to tell me that I've made a terrible mistake. So I'm going to do that first because it makes it less likely I'm going to miss. I'm going to miss the implementation and just forget to do it. So this is just going to be copying one line at the point where I want it. So content, let's put it underneath that. So we've got tags config, content type, content encoding, which is basically headers, and then underneath that we've got metadata. Specify criteria for which metadata values are sent with messages as headers. Are attached to objects as headers. There we go. Bit of output specific context there. Right, AMQP 09 next. I think the config is shared. There's AMQP 09 and then there's the old just AMQP. Ah, that's kind of interesting. We've got the same content type, content encoding fields. To messages as headers. Is it headers in AMQP land? I think it is. Yeah. Metadata from each message are delivered as headers. So I could update that line as well with the link to the field, but can't be bothered. I'm in refactoring mode right now. Yeah, so we've got the same config spec here for AMQP not 09. And then next one is Redis streams. I wonder if anybody actually uses. I know of people who have used Redis. All metadata fields of the message will also be set as key value pairs. Okay, that's the bit that we want. Specify which metadata values are included in the message body. Yeah, I know of people who use the Redis components, but I don't know of a business that's built on that. Be interesting if anybody's using Redis streams. Next one is SQS. AWS SQS. Let's put that, I don't know, under max and flight. Specify criteria for which metadata values are included are sent as headers. Whatever. Next is GCP PubSub. Oh, where's that? Okay, attributes. Specify criteria for which metadata values are sent as attributes. Sent as attributes, right? That's GCP PubSub, and the last one is HTTP client. So this one is interesting because we're mostly just wrapping a generic HTTP thing. Criteria for which metadata values are sent as headers. Can be dynamically set using function terminations. There's multiple times. I'm not actually sure if I do automatically send headers. Let's have a look. If copy response headers. Oh, okay, right, so I don't need to add it to HTTP client. I obviously misinterpreted that metadata walk. So here's an interesting one. If I try and generate the docs now, it should kick up a stink because that's naughty. Because I've documented fields that don't exist. Failed to generate docs for AMQP. Field metadata was not found in the config example and no default value was provided in the spec. What are you, dumb? Okay. Let's add it then. So this is going to be mostly copy paste. So we've got our metadata field. Let's add that. This is the annoying bit. This is the annoying part. Because now I'm doing copy pastes from several places. And I need to be careful. I need to be careful in case I do a bug. But I can still mostly copy paste. So our meta filter. Filter, and then we just replace the call there. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, we have to do a strings replace. So again, this is something that obviously needs to be documented. We do these string replaces just to make sure that what we're doing is not going to choke things up, but then the repercussion to that is users don't necessarily know when their metadata and keys are wrong. Right, the next one is AWS S3. AWS S3, where's the implementation for that? Obviously, it's in Amazon S3. Put it underneath all the content stuff. And we do a thing. And then we look for that iter. And we replace. Oh, do we not call it headers? Oh, we don't call it headers in S3 world. Oh, whatever. I'm going to leave that for now. We don't call it headers in S3 land. Okay, next one is Redis streams. Everyone who is watching is now gone. And so what I'm going to infer from that is that it's not fun to just watch somebody do a mass refactor in silence. A bit of market research there. If you're running a code stream, or if you are thinking about running a code stream, then feel free to utilize that little bit of market research for your own stream. Don't make the same mistake that I did. Right, we initialize our meta filter. And then at some point we use the meta filter. Just like that. And that's where the stream's done. SQS, back to the Amazon connectors. Almost there. Almost there, people. Almost finished. And then we're going to do the really fun stuff. Once this is done, we're going to go ahead and get on to the really juicy, fun bit. And I'm going to be honest with you because I don't want to anger people. I'm actually just going to close the stream once I'm done with this. Please don't be mad. Please don't be angry, and please come back to a future stream. Don't let this terrible, terrible stream experience stop you from coming back again. Get SQS attributes. Get SQS attributes? What? I think you mean provide. Okay. So I think see, this is inconsistent behavior. In some of the outputs, I will rename the keys for you if it's invalid. But this one, we reject it. I think in this particular case, it's because we're actually validating that the size of the key value pair is acceptable. So I think there is a justification for it, but then we should also do the same thing with all the other outputs, shouldn't we? Right, GCP pub sub, the last one, and then I'm done. Until maybe later today. GCP pub sub. This is the bit that we're interested in. Oh no, I wanted Kafka. That's my copy paste. Right. We're almost there. Just sticking it at the bottom. Or letting people discover it if they want it. Not forcing it on anybody. It's just an option. You don't have to do it. Okay, when in Rome. Do our initialization a slightly different way for this one. Right, so we get topic, right, blah, 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 blah. This is the bit where we... Huh? Oh. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Right, C, meta filter, we give it our part metadata, and then we give it our function. Hassle-free, right, okay, so that's it. That's all the outputs that I was looking to do this for. Let's just check and see if there's anything missing, which there could be. Right, the docs for quite a lot of components has changed. If I run the regular unit tests, then that's going to also validate our config spec. It's going to do a bit of extra validation that we don't do when we do a docs run. And assuming... Oh, okay, right. Output.s3.metadata field found in config but not documented. So okay, that's cool. That means that the configuration file contains our new metadata field, but the output does not state that it does. So that's probably because for both of these, I have the now deprecated variants that don't have the AWS prefix, and I've got the documentation separate, which I do. So let's just update that. Where did I put it underneath? Content encoding. So underneath content encoding here, we add that. And we do the same thing for SQS. There. Make sure the docs match. Okay. Let's do it again. First, let's make sure that we can generate the docs. And if that works, then we'll run our little test to test the docs. And that's looking good, isn't it? That's looking positive. Yep. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the integration tests, but what's the name of the test? Oh, what is the name of the test? Something metadata. I don't want to run all the tests for everything. Can send and receive metadata filtered. Can I just leave that empty and still get the tests to run? We'll find out. I should have put this on for both so I could see which tests are running. I still don't fully get test run expressions. I believe it's regular expression z separated by slashes. But that's it, that's all I know. Well, that obviously ran something, but I don't know what it ran. Let's have a look. Okay, so it did run this one at least. GCP pops up, and it did run AMQP. That's good. But we didn't run the Kafka ones, and that's because Kafka has another slash, because we do a bunch of other suites. So there's one with Max in Flight, there's one with Red Panda, there's one with some other stuff. Yeah, we only ran 2 tests there. What if I do another slash? That's probably not going to run the other tests what I wanted to do. And it looks like it's running a load of tests that I didn't want. Why is it doing that? That's interesting. It would have been quicker for me to have just ran all the integration tests. And then I would know that all my variants have been called. And I've wasted my time. I've wasted your time. And we've still got nothing to show for it, because I'm going to have to run these integration tests again. I'll tell you what, I'm going to end the stream there. I'm going to run these integration tests in my own time. I'm not going to spend your time on this. Hopefully you're okay with that. And there were some other features I was going to do today. I might run another stream later once I've sorted all of this stuff out. So keep an eye on that. And if you liked this stream, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, if you didn't like watching me do refactors, give it a thumbs down. Or just comment. If you don't feel like emotionally damaging me, then don't give it a thumbs down, but maybe give me a constructive comment instead. And enjoy your life. Don't waste it. Don't waste it watching streams that you don't enjoy. Okay, I think we ran it there. But thanks for checking this video out. Thanks for the people who watched it live. I will try and give more of a heads up in the future. That is my plan. Maybe not for a couple of weeks still, because I'm still sort of working out the cadence that I want to do these at. And I would rather not disappoint people by scheduling things and then not doing it. So give me a little bit to sort that out. And I'll catch you on the flip side.